Okay. Good evening, everyone. Glad you're here, and I'm really happy to be having this conversation about the briefing paper that we created. I want to give a sense of the sort of the scope of the project that Hugh and I worked on together and our hope for it. Basically, we, as people who care about the Green Party and care about what's going on in the country now, want to be able to provide resources and tools for all of us as Greens, whether we're running for office or we're on-the-ground activists, organizers in our communities, or we're just talking Green Party with our friends and family or associates, that we are uplifting the values of the Green Party and speaking as much as possible in one voice. Speaking from my own experience, both here in North Carolina and being active nationally with the Green Party, I wouldn't say we have the best track record when it comes to oppression issues, whether those are around race, gender, class, the whole Megillah. We're learning, we're getting better as a party, but we're not fantastic. And because Islamophobia, given the history of this country to create and exploit ways to separate us, to maintain power while keeping us from building power across lines like race, class, sexual identity, religion, racialized religion of that creates Islamophobia has been exploited in such an egregious way that we, and when I say we, I do mean mostly Hugh and myself in terms of this project, reflecting the values of our party and the party leadership to provide a set of talking points, facts, counters to myths about the Muslim faith so that we can be armed with real information to share with people, to provide to press, to use when we're making a political presentation. And that's pretty much all I have to say, except I hope it's useful, and that is our intention. Hugh?
Okay, well, my name is Farheen Hakeem, and I used to be part of the Green Party. I was once a national co-chair from 2009 to 2011 and 2011 to 2013. And I've done a lot of these dismantling Islamophobia and what is Islamophobia workshops, mostly for schools and school districts. And youth groups, but definitely, like, I've done them also at the Green Party as well. So here is the first one. Can you go to the next slide there, Hillary?
Yes. Sorry, my computer is just being very slow. I think it's just with the screen sharing. I don't know. It's thinking. I'm getting there. Come on. Do you have it up on your computer?
I do, yeah.
Let me try making you the presenter and see if that works. No. Okay, yes, no webcam. Great. Keep going. This is so weird. I've never had this before. Stop all video. We don't need video. One more time. Let's try this again. Aha! There we go.
So,
sorry about that.
Could someone just let me know if you see the second slide? Do you see the second slide that says ground rules?
Ground rules, yep.
All right. So as Hillary had mentioned earlier, at least for me, like, with this presentation, if we could try to talk about Muslims in America, that would be pretty helpful because I don't really know what goes on in Indonesia or Chechnya or Chile or wherever Muslims are and doing whatever they're doing. I can really only speak from my experience as a Muslim born and raised in America. we're only going to talk about perception and culture, not theology. I don't identify myself as an imam or hafiz. I don't have the Quran memorized or the Hadith memorized. So if people ask me, well, in your religion, X, Y, and Z, I can only speak based on what I know and how I was raised, and that's not necessarily officially done by every Muslim on the planet. And we're going to be respectful and open-minded. All right, next slide. So we're going to talk about this definition of what Islamophobia is, and I base it on a 1997 document that is right there. I think it was funded by the Rudy Mead Foundation or Running Mead Foundation in England. And I see, I usually adopt this one because it has 8 components, and so I'm just going to quick go through what they are. So the first one is Islam is seen as monolithic, block, static, and responsive to change. And so you see this quote by Bill Maher. I'm going to read it, but I'm going to change the content of what it is from Muslims to white people. So if a vast majority of white people across the world believe, and they do, that humans deserve to die for merely holding a different idea, for drawing a cartoon, for writing a book, or romancing with the wrong person, not only does the white American world has something in common with KKK, it has too much in common with the KKK. So people tend to say, well, wait a second, not all white people are the KKK. You literally are finding the worst of the worst of the world when you talk about the KKK. Well, that's what ISIS is for us. And so the idea that we are all the same and we don't want to change or evolve or even, have absolutely no idea of disagreement in how we practice is just not true. We're not all one-dimensional. So that's one aspect of Islamophobia. The other one is that Islam is seen as separate and other. It does not have values in common with other cultures and is not affected by them and does not influence them. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about all the great things different Muslims have done that have contributed to civilization, like algebra and coffee, but, a lot of times for young kids, I usually try to get a smaller list of people that they may or may have heard of. This is just a small list that I came up with that I thought kids would understand. Islam is seen as inferior to the West. It is seen as barbaric, irrational, primitive, and sexist. So there was a person that did an analysis on all the news media coverage for the last 25 years of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and said that that the news media often selected coverage of Muslim countries, treatment of women, as opposed to other countries. So basically, if a woman was gang raped in a Muslim country, it would make like the first 3 pages of the New York Times. But women disappearing in Juarez, we wouldn't have ever heard about that in those 2 newspapers. And I mean, it's problematic, right? Because number one, you're not telling us about violence against women in other countries, and number 2, you're accentuating the violence that's happening in Muslim countries, making that correlation that it's Muslims that are being violent toward women as opposed to a bunch of jerks that are being violent toward women that just happen to be in a Muslim country. There was a steering committee member way back in the day named Audrey Clement. She shared this widely photo. It was a lot of people saying that this 8-year-old was being tortured. I was pretty horrified when I saw this. And a steering committee member now, I think his name is Bahram Zandi, he is the one who actually found out that it was a fake, that this was not a real child being tortured for stealing or whatever the fancy story was. But I thought it was a good illustration of how Islam is seen as violent, aggressive, threatening, and supportive of terrorists, and engaged in clash of cultures. Because Bahram actually is from Iran. He really was questioning the validity of this photo, and I was just more questioning about. I thought the child was actually tortured because I was so convinced, but I was just questioning where it was taken and who was doing it. Like, how do you know it's in Iran? How do you know it's not Bangladesh or I don't know, some other country with brown people in it? And but it shows that often we don't even think about it, but we can make that correlation really fast, and we also don't have an opportunity to challenge when that happens. Like when she emailed that to me, I was pretty upset but there wasn't a place within the party for me to actually go to say, this person's being kind of mean to me and I don't like it because I'm Muslim and I don't appreciate it. And there was no structure to actually create a way or a mechanism to hold people accountable and start a conversation. Just doing this actual seminar tonight, we got one of the some criticism about it as well, and this leads to an illustration of how Islam is seen as a political ideology used for political or military advantage. And I had rewritten it to actually talk about Christians and the National Atheist Party at one point, just to illustrate how you can't completely blanket an entire billion people from all over the world based on the persecutions of the PKK, which is a small political fraction in between Iraq and Turkey, and it's a very obscure. And how is it a small little political faction represents and struggles that person that they represent can be attributed to an entire group of people that follow religion? It's kind of absurd. But this is what, and I actually had to Google the city Shingal because I didn't even, I'm like, what is he talking about, I just felt that it was I don't like what's happening here, therefore I don't have to respect Muslims. That's what I felt like this person was saying. Another component is criticisms made by the West by Islam are rejected. So a pretty well-known professor from Columbia University that died a few years ago named Edward Said had constantly criticized the Western view of how people look like in the Middle East and Muslims and so on. And so this is a quote that I really like because it really talks about how that for him he was Palestinian and how the idea of Palestinians were objectified and not real and not really someone to actually think about or wanting to have a national fulfillment. And at the end, he says, we are more than someone's objects. We do more than stand passively in front of whoever or whatever reason has wanted us to look at. That's one of his books is after the last guy. Oh, I don't know. Volume should be up if you hear this.
Sorry, Farheen. I don't know why slide 7 didn't come up. Do you know what it was?
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it is it's a video that happened this weekend of a woman in Trader Joe's who she's standing in line, and this other woman walked up to her and said, "Excuse me, can I get in front of you? I'm in a rush." And she's like, "No problem. Go ahead." And so she gets in line, and then she starts making fun of a Muslim woman that she saw in the store who had her face covered, and then started saying things like, why is she wearing that? Doesn't she know where she is? And the woman that she happened to be talking to was also Muslim, but she doesn't wear a scarf on her head, so nobody knew. So she didn't know. So she started talking about, well, you Muslims and female mutilation and this and just really awful things. And so her friend who was with her started recording her. And at one point, the woman said, "I shouldn't have been nice and let you in front of me." And so the other woman was like, "Well, I wish they shouldn't have let you in the country." And so I felt that the video illustrated how hostility toward Islam is justified. Is used to justify discriminatory practices toward Muslims, exclusion of Muslims from mainstream society. And so when the woman comes up and starts making fun of the other woman that is covered, it's like, how dare you shop at my grocery store? You shouldn't even be here. You shouldn't conform. And how the other woman that was there was like, can't you respect her choice? I happen to be from the same culture or the same religion, or I believe in some of her same ideals. And then all of a sudden it started being obnoxious to her. And that type of aggressiveness happens to Muslims on a daily basis sometimes. And when it does happen, it's to me it's difficult to find safe places for us to stay at or be at or participate in where we're not going to have that. And unfortunately, I can say that I've been through a lot of Green Party meetings where I'd have questions and things said to me that I always like kind of walked it off as like you're an ignorant person, you've never been exposed to people of color and whatever. But then it gets to be really tiring after a while. And so to create those welcoming spaces for people to come in, we have to like reevaluate how we marginalize people. So this slide, which is the last one, for this definition, is anti-Muslim hostility is seen as natural or normal. So this is a picture I hope you can see of the young kid with the NASA shirt. He was the one who loved science and thought it would be cool if he made a clock and brought the clock to school, and everyone at school thought he had a bomb because his name is Ahmed, and his parents are from Sudan, and he's Muslim. So he got arrested, and he was like 12 or 13 at the time. And he became famous because everyone was saying how awful it is that this kid, instead of being celebrated for loving science, ended up being criminalized for being who he is. So who suffers from Islamophobia? Muslims, of course, do, but even people who are perceived to be Muslims. So that's Hindus and Sikhs, other South Asians, Christian Arabs, Jewish Arabs, African immigrants, and so on. And here is a quick visual summary that I really like about how Islamophobia is basically penetrated. Like, it's not just at the grocery store, and it's not just at the workplace, but it's also from politics and government. When you have people that are thinking so horribly and misunderstand what it means to be a Muslim in America, making policies and decisions that literally affect your safety and life, it's problematic. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of Muslims have gotten more excited about being involved in electoral politics, but then at the same time not only thinking that their only option is the Democratic Party, when, I don't believe that. I personally believe that they're going to sell us out as fast as anyone else. But this visual just kind of makes it show really clearly that there's a lot that's out there when it comes to oppression, and Islamophobia is no exception to that. Oops, I need the next slide. There we go. Can you see the video?
I'm not sure. I both downloaded it to watch it. The videos don't seem to be working, sorry.
That's all right. So I just wanted to quick show some basic terminology. It was a fun little video of Melissa McCarthy playing Sean Spicer. And she was basically, she took out a stuffed animal with a moose, a stuffed animal with a lamb, and said Muslim. So I just kind of thought it was cute. But Islam is the name of the religion, while Muslim is the follower of the religion. So Islam's a concept, and Muslim is the actual human being. I just like the way that she had pronounced Muslim as opposed to Muslim, which a lot of people will say. But we don't call each other that. Usually when I hear the term Muslim, I'm like, that's a non-Muslim that's saying that. Halal and zabiha are terms that are used for dietary restrictions. Revert are someone who has converted to Islam. Hijab is what actually I wear, which is a head covering, and it's an act of covering oneself as a demonstration of faith. A burqa is a more longer dress that kind of it's like a really big long shirt, and some people it goes straight down to the floor. And I do not wear that. I've been asked if I have. And the niqab is a face covering, where some women do cover their faces. Okay. Next slide. Are you doing this or? Oh, that's right. I have that. Okay. So inappropriate acts. These are things that I try to tell candidates in the past. What?
September.
I'm sorry?
You have a mismatch between what's being discussed and the slide on the screen.
Did you get the multi-generation? Sorry, that was the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Whoa, that was weird. It skipped on mine. I apologize, people. Okay. Muslim American experience. Thanks. So there's this is how I categorize it for teachers to understand. Like, not every Muslim, obviously, is going to have the same experience. And so you'll have some people that are multi-generational, like whose parents or grandparents or great-grandparents may have converted to Islam. And this is Pew Research has done this Gallup poll that shows that 35% of Muslims are African Americans, and people aren't realizing that, like, yeah, they've been like there are 3 or 4 generation Muslims that exist in the country, yeah, and you know they're real and they exist. There's first generation Muslims, and that would be me, people who are born and raised here, but whose parents may have immigrated. There's immigrant Muslims, and I think most people think immigrants when they think of Muslims in America, which, I mean, I don't think it's really as high of a percentage as people would assume it is. And these are people like my parents who came to this country by their own choice. All right, did you see the next slide?
Yep,
okay.
New arrivals.
New arrivals is what most people will say in the news, refugees, but they don't actually call themselves that. So a more respectful term is new arrivals. So here are some new arrivals from Syria. Here are new arrivals from Somalia. Would be a better way to say that. And obviously, they may have lived in a refugee camp or fleeing war. And then reverts are people who weren't necessarily born into a Muslim family and brought up Muslim. Okay, so here are the inappropriate acts. So these are the things that I have discussed with previous candidates. Don't use the word Islamicist. We don't call ourselves that. We feel like it's people who want to be Islamophobic and want to bash Muslims but don't want to get accused of it, so they use the term Islamicist. We never use the word jihad, either jihadist as a term for like describing violent groups or individuals, especially when jihad is actually something as a concept of having a struggle. And there were billboards. I think Chicago.
Eric, Philadelphia.
There were billboards in Chicago where people were talking about how their personal jihad was like, I really shouldn't eat sugar, but I love that cupcake. Or, my personal jihad is I really should go work out, but I'm too tired. Which are real struggles that everyone has. Never assume that a person is willing and able to be a spokesperson for Islam or all Muslims in the world. So that's happened to me, and I usually just say, like, look, I can only talk about my experience as a Muslim, being born and raised in America, living in the Midwest most of my life. I really can't speak to what every single Muslim out there does. When talking about terrorism, foreign policy, immigration, or other controversial topics, don't force the Muslim to be center stage. Once I was introducing myself to a candidate in the Green Party, and he immediately thought that I was an immigrant and said, I'm going to do a lot for immigrants and whatever. And I just said, well, that's great, but I'm not one, so I heard you bringing that up. How about, hi, nice to meet you, my name is so-and-so. And then one thing I get a lot of questions about sometimes is shaking hands. So my advice is that if you meet someone and you kind of think they might be Muslim, but you're not sure, don't stick your hand out first. Wait until they stick their hand out and to shake hands, because not everyone does. And you can also, like I said, you can avoid awkward situations. And then, learn to pronounce and spell people's names correctly. I know for sure that when telemarketers call me and they butcher my name, I'm like, oh, well, I'm definitely not giving you my money because you can't read. It's just a basic self-dignity thing. There's nothing wrong with asking, I don't want to butcher your name. How do you say that? Could you help me learn that? So here's some really good action steps that I would give as advice. I would create a space within the party to actually talk about Islamophobia among Greens, to actually address it, resolve it, and before it goes public, and people find out about it the not so happy way. I think that if there was opportunities where people were being Islamophobic, and in general, any type of repression that should happen, that if there was a way that someone could go to a committee or a group and say that this happened and I'd really like to resolve it, because I think that would be much more, healing and healthy for people to communicate, as opposed to people feeling, A, well, I don't feel like I belong here, I don't feel safe here, I don't feel welcomed here, I'm leaving. And B, to also help the party itself be a more welcoming place and addressing issues so that they don't make the same mistakes again. And then I would also say you should do this no matter what happens when you run for office. I call it a community checklist, where if you look at your district that you're going to run under, and you think to yourself about like who are the people that you plan on serving. You know, look at all the communities that are there and see if you have the experience, like what have you done and with Muslims in the past in the community. What are you doing now as practice and policy? What do you plan to do? Because when you get elected, you're going to need the same context that you had from the past and that you presently have to help you serve all the communities better. And so at least that's my philosophy. And I am done. So
great.
Yeah.
George and Hugh, you were next.
Yeah. Thanks, Farheen. That was very helpful, and I really wish that I had been able to connect with Farheen earlier in this process, because I find that the definition of Islamophobia and how she presented that from this 1997 document is a more useful, a more actionable, an easier to put into the real world kind of definition than the more academic one we included in the paper. I'm not going to waste people's time by reviewing 10 pages of heavily footnoted material here. I will say that, you know, our intention in writing this was, one, to educate people about the scope of what Nathan Lean in his book, The Islamophobic Industry, called an industry, that in the course of the study that he conducted in researching that book about 6 or 7, 8 years ago, had raised and spent $200 million to propagandize Islamophobic mythology. And the other key point that this paper tries to address is to deconstruct some of those false narratives that have been propagated by, you know, the Jihad Watch people, the ACT folks, the people like Bridget Gabrielle and you know, folks who now find themselves with credentials to the West Wing of the White House. And, you know, I feel really behind the curve here, because this definition that Farheen just presented to us was first formulated in 1997, and here it is 20 years later when I'm starting to take a deep dive to look at this, and, you know, that I hope that this party is beginning to take a serious look at this. And all the while that we were not taking a look at this mostly over the last 10 years, mostly Zionist money and some right-wing Christian Zionist money has been poured into this industry that Mr. Lean talked about in his book, to propagate myths and false narratives that exist to otherize a quarter of the world's population, 1 to 2% of the U.S. population. I will say that, like Farheen, I also am not a scholar of Islamic studies. I have been reading them, reading a few of them. Mostly I've been reading the feminist scholars, but also folks like Dalia Mogadev, who wrote Who Speaks for Islam. They did a multi-year Gallup poll study that did interviews with Muslims all over the world, and found that, you know, the data just does not support the false narratives that are being propagated to us. It's my intention that this briefing paper might serve as a start to the resources that we as a party can offer our candidates and our political activists. And I'm hoping that, you know, in in the months and years to come that we will continue to supplement the page that the Coordinated Campaign Committee has made available to us with additional materials that can help us deconstruct very specific issues that we're faced with on a day-to-day basis. There's a national organization called the Council of American Islamic Relations. The Georgia chapter is run by a man named Edward Ahmed Mitchell, who in his public presentations will frame the Q&A by saying, this is the place to ask the uncomfortable questions. I don't want you to go home with your questions not answered. I don't want you to leave this conversation without us having an opportunity to deal with the things that you have concerns about. This is a place for us to say, I've heard this, what's real? Or people in my community are saying such and such, what's real? We have a responsibility as Greens to embrace this work of addressing Islamophobia as part of our broader work to deconstruct the ideology of white supremacy and how it interacts with the governing institutions of this country. And I think that our embracing that work is probably the most important way that we could distinguish ourselves from the corporate parties. And just like racism against black folks have justified and been used to normalize the killer cops that we're encountering, just as our racism against our immigrant neighbors from the Latin world, from South and Central America, have been used to justify draconian and fascist policies that are tearing families apart. So too is our Islamophobia being used to justify military interventions and wars of aggression and conquest around the world. One of the authors that I read in preparing this paper is a woman named Nasabu Lugod, who wrote a book called Do Muslim Women Need Saving? And, she went in great detail about all the the justifications that were a part of the buildup to the U.S. war and occupation of Afghanistan and the wars in Iraq and now, half a dozen nations throughout the Muslim world in North Africa and West Asia. What we learn from the work that she did and the research that she did and the stories that she tells is that Muslim women as victims of their culture and their religion has been held out as a reason that the Western world, translated the white world, needs to save brown women from brown men. And that it's been used to justify the expenditure of our national treasure and national blood in order to spill the blood of people around the world, mostly for the profit of the petroleum industry and related natural resources industries. So with that said, I want to hand it back to Hillary to manage a Q&A for the rest of the time we have together. And I hope that we'll see a fruitful conversation that is useful to you. One other thing I want to say here. In the 2016 election cycle, the friendliest crowds I encountered in my work to put our national slate on the Georgia ballot were the folks that I would talk to between the iftar meal and the Isha prayer during the Ramadan feast, or the Ramadan fast, rather. And I found that, I made a tour, actually, of several different masjids out here in North Fulton. A couple of different masjids, and folks are ready for folks in the Muslim community, at least here in Atlanta, are ready for a political party that is going to take seriously this nation's responsibility for dialing back the hatred and dialing back the justification for the violence and taking this challenge to our own racism seriously. And if our party could learn to do this, there's an opportunity for us to build meaningful alliances that will last for lifetimes. And with that being said, I will turn this back over to Hillary. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So mostly we're just going to facilitate some Q&A. So I don't know, it's kind of hard without raising hands online, but, feel free to speak, and we'll take a stack if we have to. And I'm unmuting a couple of people who seem to be muted.
Hello?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
And feel free to introduce yourself, please.
I'm sorry?
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, this is Joe Manchik, and I'm running for the U.S. House in Ohio. And I've got a question. Can you sort of expand upon the differentiation between Muslim and Islam?
Well, as Farheen was pointing out, Islam is what we call the faith, the religion, the practice, the 14-plus century history that derives from the revelation of the Quran and what's referred to as the Sunnah of the Prophet, which is collected and documented by Islamic scholars in collections that are known as hadith, which reflect the sayings and the practices of the Prophet Muhammad. A Muslim is a person who practices the faith. The basic root definition of Muslim is one who is obedient to the laws of the Creator. And in that way, some lecturers have told us that, the sun is Muslim, the moon is Muslim, everything that, follows the plan of the Creator is Muslim. And those of us who don't practice, we were born Muslim, and, the opportunity is there to revert to being Muslim. But Muslim talks about, it refers etymologically, I think, is sort of kind of how you pronounce that word, to one who obeys the laws of the Creator, and more generically to one who practices the faith of Islam.
Is that what you were looking for, Joe?
Well, on one of the slides, I read where you should never refer to
I can pull the slides back up.
Yeah, that one slide where I was talking about the difference between Muslim.
And speak up. I feel like everyone's very faint.
Yeah, the one slide where I don't remember exactly what it said, and I read it, and I was kind of confused by it.
I could probably answer that. So, Islam's the name of the religion. Muslim is the person. So the word is Islamicist, which a lot of political talk radio uses that term to talk about. They're trying to say that people who are terrorists, who are violent, who are, part of ISIS, instead of calling them Muslims, they're calling them Islamicists.
Okay.
And so we don't use that term. As a Muslim, like, I don't use that term to talk about us. They're just people who describe a small fraction of us that are, the worst of us, right? So I wouldn't go up to, like, yeah, and then this Klan member shows up, and then that Klan member shows up. Like, you wouldn't want me to refer to you as the Klan member that is running for House, because I'm not, because you don't represent the worst of all white people out there. So, and that's basically what, like, I was trying to say, is that, the idea of people using the term Islamicist as, I want to say Muslim, but I really don't want to get in trouble, so I'll say Islamicist, so it's kind of a backhanded all around. But it's still not okay, and it definitely makes it difficult for you as a Green Party member to get, like, community members and people interested in supporting you if you're using that term.
Right. I agree totally. And, I'd never want to be speaking offensive. So, okay. So, that's the exact slide I was referring to, Hillary, where it says never call a Muslim an Islamist. Okay, that clears it up. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking.
So this is Hillary. I might just chime in, and it's totally coincidental. It was not in preparation for this call, but I happened to read, if people just want more background knowledge, I found it a really good read and very useful. I was reading Reza Aslan's No God But God, which is basically sort of a sweeping history of Islam from the founding, and did lots of detail on the Prophet's life and to today. And, for me it was eye-opening, because I just truly didn't actually know all that much about Islam, to be quite honest. And it was a really fascinating read. So I would just recommend, if anyone, for me at least, it was good. I don't know how others who are more versed in the topic might feel, but I thought it was a really great sort of sweeping overview.
I would add that I have found his books in general, not just No God But God, but my first Aslan book was the one that he wrote about Jesus, who in Arabic in Islam is known as Isa. And I mean, one of the things folks and particularly the industry, this Islamophobic industry, want to project that Islam is completely different than Christianity, which dominates this country. And the truth is that it's the same faith. It's the same prophets. It's the same history, well, with variations, but the same names, the same characters, and many of the same stories are told in the Quran as are told in the Bible. And a shortcut would be to imagine that Islam is Christianity that doesn't go for that divinity of Christ thing and has one extra prophet. And that would be a good place to start in terms of understanding what Islam is. It's not all that alien to the stories that, for those of us who grew up in Christian churches, the stories that we've been hearing since childhood.
So, is it fair if I chime in a little bit? It's Farheen.
Yes.
I want to know, do you feel like as a political party, or do you feel confident as even as an individual? Do people here, have you thought about tactics of when somebody says something pretty racist or pretty Islamophobic or whatever? Do you feel like you're capable of challenging that person in a way that would be beneficial to everyone. So, for example, if somebody said something like, you know, a lot, because I'm an Asian woman, and a lot of times people will feel very confident to say mean things about Black people, and I just like after the initial shock, I just feel like, why would you think that's okay for you to say in front of me? Well, what makes you think that that's all right? Like, you know, right? What decade or century are you from? And how you could talk to that person in a way that if they feel open enough to be able to say that to you, but also be able to listen to maybe a different perspective, and, you know, like, are you willing to challenge and educate is basically what I'm asking.
What's going on, Annie? Hi. Hey.
I mean, speaking for myself, yes, of course. I think what I'm thinking about right now is the much more difficult things when it's not very obvious, or like I'm actually thinking about, you know, and I can't believe it didn't occur to me until tonight, but like we had someone in Philly who was checking out the Green Party for maybe 3 or 4 months straight, and he was very observant.
Yeah.
And there was just like these major culture clashes that, you know, wasn't any of us trying to be offensive or insensitive, but things like we met in a bar and, you know, obviously he was not drinking alcohol, and it wasn't enough for him to just personally not get a beer, but he didn't want to be at the table with us where it was sitting, but he didn't want us to not have, you know, like he didn't want us to stop doing what we were doing, but he wanted to sit apart, and of course that made us feel uncomfortable. Like it was just, you know, it was like a lot of those kinds of things that just, you know, we were sort of really struggling to figure out how to like welcome someone in when, you know, his sort of expectations about how we would behave was just very, very different from what we had been used to. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I could point to as being, you know, something that we sort of all struggled with.
So I have something that's come up a couple times that I haven't adequately been able to defend, I guess. And that's when it's brought up where in certain segments where the women have the face covering and, you know, they have to have the clothes, you know, down past the ankles and the full covering, how it's brought up how that form of the religion is so drastically different between males and females. And how that fits into our
I remember us really trying to cover that in the briefing paper, and if you had a chance to read it, you'll see that we talk about how the modest dress, and Farheen could share more about this if she cares to, but the modest dress is a matter of choice for people. I grew up Catholic, and we wore really long scarves on our head when we went to Mass, but that wasn't forced, that wasn't a requirement, but it was a choice that people made. And as is the modest dress, everything from covering your face to wearing the long dress that Farheen talked about earlier. That's not anything that's imposed on folks. There are some folks that would choose to dress more modestly. And that's a choice. It's not a requirement. It's our culture that encourages us to think that someone's being forced into a certain behavior. And, of course, there are cultural norms in every country that force, in many ways, culturally shape behavior. And misogyny in the U.S. and how young people dress one way or the other certainly is informed by what's going on in the culture.
Yeah, this is Farheen, and I would probably say the same thing, like that. Just it's there's no hijab police for me. Like nobody is outside my door saying you're not dressed appropriately. Like my mom and my dad and my spouse, they're not like judging on what I'm wearing when I walk out the door. Like I'm a grown woman. Like I don't need anyone to tell me what I can or can't wear. So I think what it is that if you're in a situation when someone's saying like, oh, I can't believe they have to wear that thing, I would probably respond to, I don't think they can have to wear it. I think they just want to, and I don't think it's fair for anybody to like judge what they do or don't want to wear. I mean, everyone has a right to their fashion choices, and kind of that's really what it boils down to. It's our bodies and our fashion choices. And it was like, if I, as a woman, want to, take control of my body by covering it up, that's my right, my choice. And if it makes other people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine. And if they're uncomfortable because I wear a scarf on my head, that exhibits them and their racism, not me and the false sense of oppression that could be imposed. And the message that they receive from that is a message based on their own misinformation and not based on actually asking me, what does this mean to you? Which I think, that's one thing is, I mean, maybe that's the way to start. If someone says, like, oh, I can't believe she has a face cover, that's so weird. And I'm like, well, have you asked her what it means to her to have a face cover? Like, how do you know that she's being forced to do it? What if she just wants to? What if she just straight up had a facial and, it went bad? Like, how do you know who she is and what she's about if you can't even have a decent conversation? So that's my 2 cents.
So it occurs to me that I think for some people in the Green Party particularly, discomfort with this topic is actually stemming more from discomfort with organized religion across the board, and that then I would partly put myself in this category. I mean, even though I'm I consider myself Jewish, I'm more of a secular Jew, and pretty much atheist / agnostic, and I think there's a high proportion of Greens that would consider themselves similarly, and there seems to be sort of just general discomfort with religion, period. And so it's not so much about I can say, oh well, in Judaism women wear a sheitel, right? There's a whole tradition of head covering and all kinds of modesty. And to some degree, I've rejected that and have an analysis about why that is. And so why should I think it's okay just because it's in another religion? You know what I'm saying? I think there's also that type of critique. And, not that keeps me up at night, and I have no desire to tell anyone how to dress, and, everyone's business is their own, totally. But I think there's also, in some ways, a different angle on it that is for me is a little harder to wrestle with.
Yeah, if I may, on that point, we're not going to build the political power necessary to set the direction of public policy and the priorities in public spending unless we break out of our own comfort zone and our own niche and click where we're used to operating and deal with the rest of this country. And while it's true that agnosticism, to a lesser degree atheism, but secularism is on the rise, it's also true that Islam is one of the fastest growing faiths both in the world and in this country, with respect to its growth over, where we were 10 years ago. We will not here in Georgia, in the early years of the Georgia Green Party, we seem to have identified a lot of support among Unitarians and Quakers. But the truth is that very few people in Georgia are Unitarians and Quakers. And not so many are Muslim, but in Georgia, probably there's, I would guess, a higher preponderance of folks who regularly attend some sort of faith-based gathering on a regular basis. Whether they're Easter and Christmas Christians or Ramadan and the Hajj kind of Muslims, or whether they're people who attend Juma or Sunday services every week. More people than not, at least here in the South, are affiliated with some sort of faith organization. And if we can't learn to reach out to and create a space for the participation of these folks, we're never going to build the political power that it takes. When I was attending this masjid out here on the north end of Fulton County during my second fast, I had this conversation with someone who wanted to know my conversion story. What's this white boy doing in this immigrant community? Tell us your conversion story. And I said, well, if I ever get there, I'll let you know. And they say, so you're not Muslim? And I say, well, actually my history is more of an agnostic, pagan, Buddhist, whatever, who's now participating in this fast. And they said, oh, great, you'll get along fine here. That describes most of us. And, and in the context of working on the petition drive, I met this brother from I'm blanking on the name, just south of Afghanistan, with west of India, Pakistan. His family's from Pakistan. And, he shared with me once that just looking at a small sample of his own household, which I think was like, or his immediate family or something, was like 6 or 10 members, that only one of the folks in that mix was someone who faithfully practiced all 5 prayers every day. Maybe the others, blended their prayers, or, were less committed to, getting up before the sun and making the prayers on time. But they were still Muslim. And, just like people who were raised Christian are all over the map in terms of their relationship with that faith, and or as Hillary mentioned, who were raised Jewish, have different relationship with the faith of their family, or maybe even their own faith, whether to whatever extent they claim it. The same is true in the Muslim community, and people are all over the place with respect to what their relationship is and what their practice is, and how committed they are to putting back the money to make the Hajj, and how committed they are to making it to Juma services on a weekly basis, and the whole history of Islam, in spite of what Bill Maher would have us believe, is one of a very rigorous intellectual inquiry. And Islamic studies are filled with people who are doubting and questioning and re-examining the evidence that was collected by Bukhari and the other early scholars of the faith who collected the hadith, the practices and the sayings of the Prophet. And there's 1.6 billion give or take, Muslims on the planet. There's probably about 1.6 billion different understandings of what Islam looks like and what the practice looks like and what it requires of the faithful. And you know, in my experience participating at the local masjids around here, that conversation is ongoing. Those debates still happen, and people are still engaging in those conversations. And I'm starting to lose the track of the original question, so I'm going to shut up now.
Well, is it okay if I chime in? This is Farheen.
Yeah, please.
So I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I also think that it's not just religion. There's also racism within the party itself. Like, I don't believe that if I didn't wear a scarf and I didn't practice Islam at all, and I walked into a room, I would be questioned. So, what country are you from? Where are you from? Why is your English so good? I don't think that we're at a place where we are really that. I mean, that Green Party meetings at least are not that welcoming to people of color, and I know that, like, we ideally want to be and we think we are, but I feel as a person of color, I haven't experienced that. And I don't think wasn't a devout Muslim. I don't think it would have changed my experience. And those people of color that I do know that are atheists and agnostics, are uncomfortable with religion and don't identify it, have also expressed that to me. And I think more that the reason why this topic is so uncomfortable for people is because it's like getting a lot of news media right now. We got to be attentive to it, but oh crap, that means I actually have to also think about my values and my practices. And am I being racist? Am I part of an organization that practices racism? What can I do to change my organization? What can I do to change my behavior? And it's all uncomfortable. Nobody wants to actually. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. But it's also, if it's not done, it's not sustainable. Because, you need, like, if you're a candidate right now, you do need to go to mosques. Because mosques are expecting you. So many other candidates have gone. Democrats, Republicans, they've gone already. They're expecting you to contact them and show up. It's not 2004 anymore where, no one ever thought about the Muslim community. People are actually become much more politically savvy and expect politicians and candidates to contact them and say, like, would you like to address our crowd? And Hugh put up such a great point of Ramadan starting May 25th, and it runs all the way to June 25th. That means there's 30 iftars, 30 dinners, 30 free meals at these mosques you can go to and talk to people as there's stuff
and some great eating too.
yeah. I mean, you can stuff your face too, and talk to them and say, I'm running for this office. What are some of the issues that are important to you? Because right now, like, Muslims are affected by every office, whether you're president or school board. Like, they're going to want to know, is my kid safe to go to school? Is my taxes going to be used for something? If there's what are you going to do for the park? So what are you going to do for the city? What are you going to do as congressperson? Like, all of that matters. And that they're there for you. So it's like the door's open. Come on, jump in.
So that's a great point, if I might jump in. And Jabari, are you still on the call? Can I put you on the spot?
Yes.
So I know we haven't really met, but I've heard through the grapevine that you took this document around, or you were planning to take it to some local mosques in New York City and perhaps put together an event around it. And in Philly, we thought that was a great idea, and we might try to copy you. But now I'm like, ooh, Ramadan, we could do something like a dinner maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds fun too. Can you hear me on my? I don't even know how this mic works.
Yep, I can hear you
we
great.
Can hear you.
Oh yeah, I wanted to take it around and like get some thoughts and like I know I'm local in NYC, just running for city council, but I know the NYPD has been doing a heavy amount of surveillance on mosques, and I wanted to just like talk with local leaders in the Muslim community about what they felt, if they felt safe, or if they how they felt about knowing that the NYPD was tracking like mosques so heavily, and any rise in Islamophobia since the election of Trump.
Cool. So Farheen, it would be acceptable to show up to a breaking of the fast dinner, like if that's not like presumptuous or rude or intrusive?
Yeah, I would, but ahead of time I would call them and like leave a message or try to talk to someone and say like I'd like to come and I'd like to bring some literature and have some conversations with people if that's okay. I mean, I've never known anyone to show up for an iftar meal and get turned away and be told like get out. I've never seen that happen.
Right.
But it's just in general like it'd be nice to call ahead of time. And if you really want to kiss a major ass, you could bring some dates. Like buy some dates and bring them.
Yeah.
We're talking about the fruit, not.
Yeah, I got it. Yes. And obviously the big meals are the first and the end, right? The beginning and the end.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
not
the
too many
end.
people go to the mosque for the beginning one though.
Okay, right. It's the end that's the big deal. But and the end, remind me, is sort of a little squishy on the calendar because of the whole lunar, like. I feel like we had this when we were planning A&Ms around Ramadan. Like, it's not necessarily the last. It's not necessarily going to be June 25th, or is it?
There are a bunch of different councils of scholars who watch the moon and announce that yes, we have seen the new crescent moon, and the month is over and the fast can end. And they don't necessarily talk to or agree with each other, and so what you want to do is communicate with your local masjid and ask them what they think the calendar is.
Yeah.
Because another masjid in the same city might be paying attention to a different council of scholars and think that it's the next day or the day before. Although frequently, I mean, here in Atlanta, to my knowledge, most of the masjids collaborate with one another so that they can share, Eid celebrations for the families. Picking up on what was said earlier about, showing up for the evening prayers and the iftar meal was one of the most welcoming experiences that I've ever had. I can't imagine that things are much different in other communities. People even wanted me to, sit and let them serve me, and I had to have these back and forth discussions where I insisted on standing in the line for the buffet with everyone else, and because people wanted to be that welcoming and take care of me as a guest, and I can't imagine that people would encounter a different experience in other communities. Not every masjid is going to hold nightly iftar meals, but many of the larger ones will, or at least weekly. And the other thing that I want to point out is that, of course, the lunar calendar doesn't match up with the solar calendar, but for the last couple of years, the month of Ramadan has overlapped with the summer solstice, and it will again this year. The implication of that is that the sunset prayer is almost at 8:30, almost 9 o'clock. And the iftar meal would follow that, and then the Isha prayer after that. And the implication is that showing up at these iftar meals is something that you could do after you do the candidate forum, after you do, a coffee clutch, after you do all these events that would shut down at 8:30 and 9. You can still, drive a mile or two and be at the local mosque and participate in the dinner. And because of the confluence of the solar and the lunar calendars at this particular juncture, you'll be able to squeeze one more campaign appearance in each night without having to give up the other ones in order to do this, because people are the masjid is where people come to socialize and to meet friends and to do business, and maybe not in the musalla but out in the parking lot. There's a lot of camaraderie and conversation that goes on all around, people making salat and enjoy and sharing the meal. There's a lot of other things that are happening while people are congregated.
So I looked it up. The solstice is June 21st.
Right, which is the longest day of the year, is the reason that I...
Right.
So the sunset is as late as it will ever get on the solstice.
Cool. All right. Good idea. All right. It's 10:20, at least on the East Coast. Any final comments, questions? All right. So first of all, I want to thank our speakers again for joining us and for sharing their experience. If you haven't yet seen it, please do check out both the trifold and the full document. I did finally read it over the weekend, and it was quite good. And you can get it on greensforracialjustice.org/Islamophobia, and that's greens, 4, racialjustice.org. The CCC has generally a once-a-month call for candidates and other Green Party volunteers to help us sort of build our knowledge base and our toolkit around running for office. We will switch to more nitty-gritty, nuts and bolts kinds of things in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to have a call on voter targeting. And that's about it. And then I've recorded this. We'll archive it and put it on our site. And that's if you go to gpus.org and then click on the committee pages, and then the CCC page, there's a link to all of our webinars, and I'll get that recorded and put up, within another hour tonight. And all of our previous calls are on there as well. So, and that's basically it. If you're a candidate, please keep in touch with us and let us know how it's going and what you're doing and what kind of help and support you need. And that's about it.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, guys. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thanks.
Thank you.